I, 16M, have been in a specialized residential arts program since I was 11, and now my stepdad is threatening to pull me out for my senior year because he thinks I'm too detached from the family. This whole situation is making me feel like I'm losing my mind, and I honestly don't know what to do anymore. Some background that's really important to understand this mess. My biological dad left when I was 8, and it wasn't a gradual thing. One day he was there. The next day he was packing boxes and telling me he needed to find himself. I was devastated. My mom was devastated. We were both just trying to survive emotionally when Marcus came into our lives about a year and a half later. My mom met Marcus at her real estate office. He was a client looking to buy a house after his own divorce. Marcus seemed like everything my dad wasn't. Stable, responsible, present. He had a daughter from his previous marriage, Emma, now 14, who lived with us every other weekend and during school breaks. At first, everything felt like we were building something beautiful together. Marcus was really good with me initially. He came to my Little League games, helped me with homework, even started teaching me basic carpentry in his garage workshop. My mom was happier than I'd seen her since before my dad left. For about a year, it felt like we were becoming a real family. But then everything shifted when I was 10. My mom announced she was pregnant, with twins, as it turned out. Marcus was over the moon, talking about our growing family and new beginnings. But I started noticing changes in how he treated me almost immediately. Little things at first. He'd be shorter with me when I asked for help, less interested in my school projects, more focused on preparing for the babies. The real turning point came when I was 11 and started having what everyone called behavioral issues. Looking back, I think I was just struggling with all the changes. My mom was on bed rest for part of her pregnancy. Marcus was stressed about finances and preparing for twins, and I felt like I was being pushed to the sidelines. I started acting out at school, my grades slipped, and I was definitely more moody and difficult at home. That's when I started overhearing the conversations between my mom and Marcus late at night. I remember one night in particular when I got up to get water and heard Marcus saying something like, "He's becoming impossible to manage. And with the twins coming, we need to think about what's best for everyone." My mom was crying and saying she felt like she was failing me, and Marcus kept reassuring her that sometimes kids need different environments, and that it wasn't about failing, it was about finding the right fit. Marcus had done research on this incredible residential arts program in Vermont called the Whitmore Academy of Fine Arts. He'd noticed that I was always drawing and building things, and he presented it to my mom as this amazing opportunity. "Look at this place," he'd say, showing her the website. "This is the kind of education we could never provide him here. World-class facilities, professional artists as teachers, kids from all over the world. He could develop his talents in ways we can't even imagine." The tuition was astronomical, something like $55,000 a year. But Marcus had gotten a big promotion around the same time, and he kept emphasizing how this was an investment in my future. He made it sound like he was sacrificing for me, like sending me away was this generous, selfless act. My mom was hesitant. I could tell she didn't want me to go, but Marcus was so convincing. He brought up how I'd been struggling in regular school, how I seemed unhappy, how this could be a fresh start for me. He also, and this is the part that still hurts, kept mentioning how important it would be for them to have time to bond as a family unit when the twins arrived. I remember the night they finally told me about Whitmore. Marcus sat me down and presented it like this amazing adventure, this incredible opportunity that most kids could only dream of. He showed me pictures of the studios, the dormitories, the campus grounds. He talked about how I'd be surrounded by other artistic kids, how I'd have access to equipment and instruction that could change my life. And honestly, part of me was excited. The place looked incredible, and I was at an age where the idea of independence was appealing. But another part of me, the part that Marcus probably didn't want to acknowledge, understood exactly what was happening. I was being sent away so they could start their new family without the complication of my dad's kid hanging around. The twins, David and Sarah, were born in late spring, and I started at Whitmore that fall. The transition was harder than anyone expected, including me. Despite being excited about the program, I was incredibly homesick for the first few months. I'd call home crying, begging to come back, but Marcus and my mom kept encouraging me to stick it out and give it a real chance. What saved me was finding my people. My 3 closest friends, Jake, Zoe, and Connor, all had similar stories in different ways. Jake's parents are both surgeons who travel constantly for Doctors Without Borders, and they'd sent him to Whitmore because they literally couldn't provide stable care at home. Zoe's dad is a diplomat, so she's lived all over the world and never had a consistent school experience until Whitmore. Connor's parents are both Broadway performers who tour constantly, and they needed somewhere stable for him to land. We all understood what it was like to feel like outsiders in traditional family situations. We bonded over being the kids whose families had good reasons for sending us away, and we became each other's chosen family in a way that probably saved all of us. But here's the thing about Whitmore. It's not just a place where rich parents dump their inconvenient kids. It's genuinely an incredible school. The facilities are better than most colleges. We have professional-grade studios, kilns, 3D printers, darkrooms, recording studios, dance studios, theaters. The teachers are working artists who've shown in galleries and museums around the world. The academic classes are small and rigorous. Students regularly get into top-tier art schools and universities. I specialize in sculpture and digital media, and by my sophomore year, I was creating work that was being displayed in regional exhibitions. My junior year, I won a statewide high school art competition and got written up in the local paper. I've built a portfolio that's already gotten interest from several college programs. More than the artistic development, though, I found a community where I belong. The four of us, me, Jake, Zoe, and Connor, are inseparable. We collaborate on projects, support each other through personal crises, celebrate each other's successes. During the school year, we spend almost every waking moment together. During breaks, we often visit each other's families or stay on campus for special programs. Which brings me to the complicated part of this whole story, my relationship with home. I only go back to Portland for winter break and part of summer break. Spring break, Thanksgiving, and most other holidays, I stay with my friends' families or participate in special programs at school. Marcus has always signed off on this without complaint. In fact, he usually seems relieved when I tell him I have other plans. When I am home, the dynamic is awkward. Marcus, my mom, and the twins, now 5, have their established routine. They do family game nights every Friday, weekend trips to Marcus's family cabin, elaborate birthday parties for the twins, Sunday morning pancake breakfasts. I'm always invited to participate, but it feels performative, like they're checking a box rather than genuinely wanting me there. My mom tries really hard to include me and show interest in my life at school. She asks about my friends, wants to see photos of my artwork, tries to understand what I'm learning. But Marcus engages with me the way you might engage with a house guest. Polite, cordial, but distant. When he does ask about school, it's generic questions like how are your grades, or are you staying out of trouble? Never anything about my actual interests or experiences. The twins are complicated. When it's just me and them, we actually have a lot of fun together. Sarah loves when I show her my digital art projects on my laptop, and David is fascinated by my sculptures and always wants to help me build things. They're curious about my life at school and ask me to tell them stories about my friends and adventures. But the moment Marcus comes home, their whole energy changes. They become distant and formal with me, like they've been coached on how to interact with me. It's subtle, but it's there. They'll be laughing and playing with me 1 minute, and then Marcus walks in and suddenly they're focused on him and barely acknowledging I exist. I should mention that Emma and I actually have a really good relationship. She's incredibly talented at photography, and we've collaborated on some cool mixed media projects during her visits. She's also the one person in the family who seems to genuinely understand my perspective. She's told me that she sometimes feels like an outsider too, being from Marcus's first marriage, and that she thinks I get treated unfairly sometimes. But Emma is only there every other weekend and during some school breaks, so our relationship is limited by time and geography. She goes to a regular public school in town and lives primarily with her mother, so she's not dealing with the same residential school situation I am. This brings me to this summer, which started out normally enough. I came home in mid-June, settled into my usual routine of trying to stay out of everyone's way while still being friendly and helpful. I've set up a workspace in the corner of the garage where I can work on personal art projects without cluttering up the main house. Marcus actually built me a really nice setup there a few years ago. Proper lighting, ventilation, storage for supplies, which I'll admit was really thoughtful and generous. My typical summer routine involves working on art projects, hanging out with the few local friends I've maintained relationships with, going for runs in the nearby state park, and occasionally joining family activities when invited. I try to strike a balance between being present and available without being intrusive or demanding attention. But apparently, my version of balanced presence wasn't what Marcus was looking for. 3 weeks ago, everything exploded in a way I never saw coming. I was in the garage working on a large metal sculpture, an abstract piece inspired by the forest landscapes around Whitmore, when Marcus came in and sat down on the old couch he keeps out there. This never happens. Marcus might poke his head into the garage to grab a tool or ask me to move my bike, but he doesn't sit and chat. He started by asking about the sculpture, which caught me off guard because he rarely shows interest in my actual artwork. I explained the concept and the techniques I was using, expecting him to nod politely and change the subject. Instead, he kept asking questions, and I started to think maybe we were having a breakthrough moment. But then the conversation took a sharp turn. Marcus said he'd been observing my behavior over the past few weeks and was concerned about my relationship with the family. He said that while he appreciated that I was respectful and helpful around the house, he'd noticed that I seemed to prefer spending time alone or with friends rather than participating in family activities. I was genuinely confused by this observation because I thought I'd been pretty normal in my participation. I eat dinner with them most nights. I watch movies with everyone when invited. I help with the twins when asked. I contribute to conversations. But Marcus had apparently been keeping a mental tally of all the times I'd chosen to work in the garage instead of joining spontaneous family activities. All the times I'd gone out with friends instead of staying home. All the family outings I'd politely declined. He brought up specific examples. The weekend when they'd gone to the farmer's market and I'd chosen to stay home and work on a project. The evening when they'd played board games and I'd gone to see a movie with friends. The day they'd gone to the twins' swim meet and I'd said I had plans to go hiking with a friend from high school. At the time, none of these had seemed like big deals. The farmer's market trip was spur of the moment, and I was in the middle of a time-sensitive project. The board game night happened on a night when I'd already made plans with friends I hadn't seen in months. The swim meet was on a day when I'd already committed to hiking with my friend Emma. Different Emma. This one's a local friend. And honestly, I didn't think my presence was expected or needed at a swim meet for 5-year-olds. But Marcus had interpreted all of these choices as evidence that I was pulling away from the family and choosing to isolate myself. He said it reminded him of how I'd behaved right before we decided to send me to Whitmore, and that he was worried I was falling back into old patterns. This is where the conversation took a turn that made my stomach drop. Marcus said that he and my mom had been discussing the situation, and they'd come to the conclusion that I needed to reconnect with my roots and learn what it means to be part of a family unit. He said they decided that I should finish high school locally instead of returning to Whitmore for my senior year. The plan, as Marcus explained it, was to enroll me in the local private school, Portland Academy, and have me live at home for my final 2 years of high school. He said this would give us time to rebuild our family relationships and help me develop more normal social connections with kids in our community. He presented this like it was a thoughtful, caring decision that he and my mom had made after careful consideration of what was best for me. He talked about how I'd been away for so long that I'd missed out on important family bonding time, and how this was a chance to make up for lost time before I left for college. But all I could hear was that they wanted to rip me away from everything that mattered to me. My friends, my teachers, my artistic community, my senior project, my college preparation, because Marcus had decided I wasn't participating in family life the way he wanted me to. I completely panicked, like full-on panic attack. I started crying, which made me feel pathetic and young, and I tried to explain what Whitmore meant to me. I told Marcus about my senior exhibition that I'd been planning for 2 years, about the portfolio I was building for college applications, about the teacher recommendations that were crucial for my future. I tried to explain that my friends at school weren't just casual acquaintances. They were my chosen family, my support system, my artistic collaborators. But Marcus kept interrupting me, saying that my extreme emotional reaction was exactly what he was talking about. He said it was unnatural for a teenager to be so attached to a school, and that my distress proved that I needed to relearn how to form healthy attachments with my actual family. I'll admit I didn't handle the rest of the conversation well. The more Marcus talked about my unhealthy attachment to Whitmore and my need to prioritize family, the more upset I became. I started saying things I probably shouldn't have said. I told him that he'd never been a real father to me anyway, so why did it matter now what I did with my life? I said that my friends at school were more family to me than anyone in this house had ever been, and that forcing me to stay would just make me resent everyone here even more. I said that if he really cared about my well-being, he'd support the path that was making me happy and successful instead of trying to control me. This made Marcus furious. He stood up from the couch and his whole demeanor changed. He said that my disrespectful attitude and selfish perspective proved exactly why this decision was necessary. He said I'd clearly become too independent and needed to remember my place in this family. The phrase, "remember my place," really got to me. It felt like he was saying that my place was to be grateful for whatever scraps of attention and inclusion they threw my way, and that wanting more or wanting different was inappropriate. Marcus left the garage saying that the decision was final, and that I needed to start adjusting my expectations for the fall. He said they'd already looked into enrollment at Portland Academy, and that the transition would happen whether I liked it or not. I spent the rest of that day in a complete emotional spiral. I felt like I was 11 years old again, being told that my life was going to change completely and that my feelings about it didn't matter. The powerlessness was overwhelming. That night, I texted frantically with Jake, Zoe, and Connor. They were all devastated for me and furious on my behalf. Connor's mom, who's kind of become a mentor figure for me over the years, even offered to call Marcus directly to advocate for me. But I was terrified that adult intervention would make Marcus even more determined to assert his authority. I spent the next day walking around Portland, trying to clear my head and figure out my next move. I considered calling my biological dad, who I haven't spoken to in over 2 years. Reaching out to my favorite teacher at Whitmore, even looking into legal options for emancipated minors or financial aid that would make me independent of Marcus's decisions. But I kept coming back to the idea that I needed to find a way to communicate with Marcus that didn't trigger his defensiveness or his need to assert parental authority. Maybe if I could approach this more strategically, more maturely, I could change his mind. That evening, I decided to write Marcus a long email. I spent hours crafting what I thought was a mature, reasonable message that addressed his concerns while advocating for my needs. I started by apologizing for my outburst and acknowledging that I could have handled the conversation better. I told Marcus that I understood his concerns about family connection and that I genuinely wanted to have a closer relationship with him, my mom, and the twins. I tried to validate his feelings while also explaining my perspective. I told him that my strong connection to Whitmore wasn't about rejecting my family. It was about pursuing my passion and building my future. I explained that the school wasn't just academically important to me, but that it had become my artistic and social home in a way that had helped me grow into a confident, successful person. I suggested compromises that might address his concerns without derailing my education. More regular video calls with the family during the school year, longer visits home during breaks, having the family visit me at Whitmore sometime so they could see my world. Maybe even doing a summer internship in Portland between high school and college to spend more time at home. I also tried to reframe the situation in terms that I thought Marcus would respond to. I emphasized my academic success at Whitmore. I maintain a 3.8 GPA, my leadership roles. I'm president of the community service club and a peer tutor. And my artistic achievements, multiple exhibition pieces, competition wins, college interest. I tried to show him that pulling me out of school with 1 year left would be counterproductive to all the goals he claimed to have for me. I closed the email by saying that I knew he wanted what was best for me, and that I wanted to work with him to find a solution that would strengthen our family relationships without derailing my educational and artistic development. I thought I'd crafted something thoughtful and persuasive. I was wrong. Marcus's response came the next morning, and it was like a punch to the gut. I made my position clear yesterday. Your inability to accept my decision without argument only reinforces my belief that you have become too independent for your own good. A child your age should trust their parents' judgment without needing detailed explanations or negotiations. This discussion is closed. I expect you to spend the rest of the summer adjusting to this new reality instead of looking for ways to argue with it. That was it. No engagement with any of the points I'd made, no acknowledgement of my feelings or concerns, just a complete shutdown that made me feel even more powerless than before. I was devastated. I spent the whole day in my room, alternating between crying and researching desperate options. I looked into legal emancipation, too complicated and unlikely to work. I researched whether my biological dad would have any legal say. Doubtful, since he'd essentially signed over his parental rights when my mom remarried. I even looked into whether Whitmore had any policies about advocating for students in family disputes. They didn't, and getting them involved would probably make things worse. But then I remembered something that Emma had mentioned during her last visit. She'd been talking about how stressed Marcus seemed lately, and she'd mentioned something about him being worried about money. Apparently, there had been some kind of investment that hadn't worked out the way he'd expected. The twins' private preschool was costing more than anticipated. It occurred to me that maybe this whole family bonding explanation was a cover story, and that the real issue was financial. Whitmore costs about $60,000 a year when you include tuition, room, board, and expenses. That's a huge chunk of money, especially if Marcus was dealing with other financial pressures. This possibility gave me a different angle to approach the problem. Instead of continuing to argue with Marcus directly, which clearly wasn't working, maybe I needed to talk to my mom and see if I could understand what was really driving this decision. The next day, I found my mom in the kitchen making lunch and asked if we could talk honestly about the Whitmore situation. She immediately got defensive and started repeating Marcus's talking points about family closeness and my need to be grounded in reality. But I pushed back gently and asked her to think about whether pulling me out of school with 1 year left was truly in my best interest, or whether there might be other factors influencing this decision. I could see the conflict in my mom's face. She's never been good at hiding her emotions, and I could tell she was torn about the whole situation. Finally, she admitted that money was a consideration and that Marcus had been feeling overwhelmed by the financial commitments they'd taken on. She said the local private school was still excellent, which is true. Portland Academy is a good school and would cost about a quarter of what Whitmore costs. But then, my mom started talking about her own feelings, and I realized that the financial issue was only part of the story. She said she'd been feeling guilty for years about missing out on my high school experience, and that she sometimes felt like she barely knew me anymore. She said that when Marcus had suggested bringing me home, part of her had been excited about the idea of having me around more, of being more involved in my daily life. This was actually harder to hear than the financial concerns, because I could understand where she was coming from. I had grown away from them, and while that felt natural and healthy to me, I could see how it might feel like rejection to her. My mom also admitted that she'd been feeling caught between Marcus's strong opinions about what was best for our family and her own instincts about what was best for me. She said Marcus had been really persuasive about the benefits of bringing me home, but that she'd been having doubts ever since they'd made the decision. This conversation gave me hope that maybe my mom could be an ally if I approached the situation right. I told her that I understood her feelings and that I wanted to be closer to her too, but that ripping me away from everything I'd built at Whitmore would damage our relationship instead of strengthening it. I asked her to consider what message it would send to pull me out right before my senior year, that succeeding and thriving somewhere else was somehow wrong or threatening. I also told my mom that I'd already started researching scholarships and work-study opportunities for my senior year. I showed her emails I'd been exchanging with the financial aid office about options for families experiencing financial hardship. I explained that there might be ways to reduce the financial burden without completely upending my education. My mom started crying and admitted that she felt like she was failing me no matter what she did. If she supported Marcus's plan, she was prioritizing his feelings over mine. If she advocated for me to stay at Whitmore, she was undermining her husband and potentially damaging her marriage. I felt terrible for putting her in that position, but I also felt like this was the first honest conversation we'd had about the situation. I told my mom that I didn't want her to have to choose between Marcus and me, but that I needed her to consider the long-term consequences of this decision on my future and on our relationship. That evening, my mom and Marcus had a huge fight. I could hear them from my room, Marcus insisting that I was manipulating my mom, and that this was exactly the kind of behavior he was trying to correct by bringing me home. My mom arguing that maybe they should reconsider, that I'd made valid points about my future, and that it seemed cruel to uproot me right before graduation. The fight went on for over an hour, with voices getting raised and doors slamming. It ended with Marcus sleeping in the guest room and not speaking to anyone for the next 2 days. During those 2 days, the whole house felt like a pressure cooker. Marcus was cold and distant with everyone, clearly furious that his authority was being questioned. My mom was stressed and teary, obviously feeling caught in the middle. The twins picked up on the tension and were clingy and cranky. I felt guilty for causing so much family drama, but also frustrated that wanting to finish my education where I'd started it was being treated like such an unreasonable request. On the third day, Emma came for her regular weekend visit and immediately sensed that something was wrong. When I explained what was happening, she was outraged. Apparently, Marcus had always talked to her about how proud he was of my achievements at Whitmore and how important it was to support young artists in following their passions. Emma confronted Marcus directly about what she saw as hypocrisy. She pointed out that he'd always bragged to his friends and colleagues about having a stepson at such a prestigious arts program, and that he'd never expressed concerns about my family attachment before. She also, and this is where Emma really surprised me, told Marcus that she thought he was acting out of insecurity rather than genuine concern for my well-being. Emma can be incredibly direct when she wants to be, and apparently she told Marcus that pulling me out of school right before graduation would make him look petty and controlling to everyone in their social circle. She said that all of my achievements at Whitmore reflected well on him as a stepfather, and that sabotaging my senior year would make people question his judgment and character. I don't know exactly what Emma said to Marcus, but whatever it was, it had an impact. That evening, Marcus came out to the garage where I was working and sat down across from me again. He looked exhausted and older than I'd ever seen him. He was quiet for a long time, just watching me work on my sculpture. Finally, he said that he'd been thinking about everything that had been said over the past few days, and that maybe he'd been too hasty in his decision. For the first time since I'd known him, Marcus started talking to me about his own insecurities and fears. He said that he'd always felt uncertain about his role in my life, never sure if he was overstepping or understepping as a stepparent. He said that watching me grow up and become successful at Whitmore made him proud, but also made him feel like he was losing whatever connection we'd had when I was younger. Marcus admitted that his main worry wasn't really about family time or my behavior. It was that I was growing away from them, and that once I graduated and went to college, I'd disappear from their lives entirely. He said he'd convinced himself that bringing me home for senior year would give us a chance to rebuild our relationship before I became completely independent. He also acknowledged that finances had been a factor in his thinking, though he said it wasn't the main reason. He'd been looking for ways to reduce expenses, and my tuition was obviously a significant cost. But he said that if money was the only issue, they could have worked something out without pulling me from school entirely. This conversation felt completely different from our previous interactions. Marcus was being vulnerable and honest in a way he'd never been before, and I felt like I was talking to a real person instead of just an authority figure. I told Marcus that I understood his fears, and that I wanted to have a relationship with him too. I said that I was grateful for everything he'd done for me over the years, including supporting my education at Whitmore. But I also told him that trying to force closeness by controlling my choices wasn't going to create the relationship he wanted. I suggested that maybe we could use my senior year as practice for staying connected when I was away at college. We could establish regular communication patterns, find shared interests to talk about, maybe even work on projects together when I was home for breaks. Marcus was quiet for a long time after I said this. Finally, he asked if I would be willing to include the family more in my Whitmore experience, maybe video chatting regularly to show them what I was working on, or having them visit the school sometime to meet my friends and teachers. I told him absolutely, and that I'd actually been hoping they'd want to be more involved in that part of my life. I said that one of the reasons I'd felt distant at home was that no one ever seemed very interested in hearing about school, my friends, or my artwork in detail. Marcus looked surprised by this and said that he'd been trying not to pry or make me feel like I had to perform for them when I was home. He said he'd interpreted my independence as a sign that I didn't want them involved in my school life. This was such a classic miscommunication situation. I'd been interpreting his lack of questions as disinterest, while he'd been interpreting my independence as a request for privacy. We'd both been making assumptions instead of just talking to each other directly. By the end of that conversation, Marcus had agreed to let me return to Whitmore for senior year. He said he wanted to visit the school sometime in the fall to see my work and meet my teachers and friends. He also said he hoped we could find ways to stay better connected during the school year so that the transition to college wouldn't feel so abrupt. I almost started crying again, but this time from relief instead of panic. The weight that had been sitting on my chest for weeks finally lifted, and I felt like I could breathe again. It's been about 10 days since that conversation, and things at home have been gradually getting better. Marcus has been making more of an effort to engage with my art projects and ask detailed questions about my plans for senior year. I've been making more of an effort to participate in family activities and share stories about my friends and experiences at school. The twins seem excited that I'm not disappearing forever, and my mom has been noticeably more relaxed now that the family crisis has been resolved. Emma texted me that she's proud of how I handled the whole situation, and that she thinks this experience brought out the best in everyone, eventually. I'm supposed to go back to Whitmore in about a week, and I've never been more excited for anything in my life. But I'm also feeling more connected to my family than I have in years, which is an unexpected positive outcome from all this drama. I'm still processing a lot of complicated emotions about the whole experience. Part of me is grateful that it worked out, and that we all learned to communicate better. But part of me is still angry that it got to the point where my entire future felt threatened because of miscommunication and unspoken assumptions. I also keep thinking about how close I came to losing everything that matters to me, and how many other kids might not have the advantages I had. A supportive stepsister who was willing to intervene, a mother who was ultimately willing to advocate for me, financial aid options at school, and a stepfather who was eventually willing to listen to reason. But mostly, I'm just relieved and excited about senior year. I'm working on a multimedia installation about family, identity, and belonging for my final exhibition, which feels pretty fitting given everything that just happened. Update. Same day. Thanks for all the supportive comments. A few people have asked about some details that I probably should have included in my original post. First, about my biological dad. A lot of people are wondering why I didn't consider reaching out to him for help. The truth is that my dad didn't just leave when I was 8. He basically disappeared from my life entirely. He moved to California, got remarried within a year, and started a whole new family. He sends birthday cards and Christmas presents, but we haven't had a real conversation in over 2 years. When my mom remarried Marcus, my dad was actually relieved to step back from most parental responsibilities. Legally, he still has some parental rights, but realistically, he wouldn't have been helpful in this situation. He probably would have just told me to listen to Marcus and not make waves. Second, about my relationship with my mom. Several people have asked why my mom seemed to go along with Marcus's plan initially if she had doubts. The truth is that my mom has always struggled with asserting herself in relationships. After my dad left, she was so grateful to find someone stable and reliable like Marcus that she's been really careful not to do anything that might jeopardize their marriage. Over the years, she's gotten into the habit of deferring to Marcus on major decisions, especially anything involving me. I think she felt guilty about my dad leaving and wanted to make sure her new marriage worked, even if it meant sometimes putting Marcus's opinions ahead of mine. This whole crisis was actually the first time I'd seen my mom really push back against Marcus when it came to something involving me, which felt significant. I think she's been feeling more confident about advocating for me as I've gotten older and more independent. Third, about the financial aspect. A few people asked why Marcus would spend so much money on my education if he didn't really want me around. I think the answer is complicated. Marcus genuinely believes in education and opportunity, and I think he was proud of being able to provide me with something as prestigious as Whitmore. It reflected well on him as a stepfather and showed his friends and colleagues that he was committed to my success. But I also think that paying for Whitmore allowed him to feel like he was fulfilling his parental obligations without having to deal with the messy, day-to-day reality of actually parenting a teenager who wasn't his biological child. It was a way to be generous and supportive while also maintaining distance. When the financial pressure started building this year, I think Marcus saw it as an opportunity to bring me home under the guise of family bonding, without having to admit that he'd been happy to have me away for most of my adolescence. Fourth, about Emma. Several people commented on how mature and supportive Emma was throughout this situation. She really was incredible, and I'm so grateful to have her as a stepsister. I think Emma has always felt like she had to navigate carefully between her mom's house and her dad's house. So, she's developed really good skills for reading family dynamics and intervening when necessary. Emma also told me later that she'd been frustrated for a while about how Marcus treated me. She said she'd noticed that he talked about me differently when I wasn't around, always positive and proud, but that he seemed uncomfortable with actual closeness when I was home. She'd been wanting to say something for a while, but hadn't found the right opportunity until this crisis forced the issue. Update 2. 1 week later, I'm back at Whitmore, and everything feels surreal, but amazing. My friends were so relieved when I told them the final outcome. Apparently, they'd been making contingency plans for how to support me if Marcus hadn't changed his mind. Jake's parents had even offered to let me stay with them for senior year if I could figure out a way to pay tuition independently. Connor's mom, who's a Broadway performer and has become like a mentor to me, actually sent Marcus a handwritten letter thanking him for supporting my artistic development and inviting the whole family to visit Whitmore whenever they wanted. She included photos from some of my exhibitions over the years and a detailed list of colleges and universities that had already expressed interest in my work based on my portfolio. I think receiving that letter meant a lot to Marcus. It was concrete evidence from a respected adult about what I'd been building at Whitmore, and it framed his support of my education as something admirable rather than just an expensive obligation. Connor's mom has a way of making people feel appreciated for doing the right thing, which I think was exactly what Marcus needed. My sculpture teacher, Miss Rodriguez, also called home to discuss my senior project plans and express how excited the entire faculty was about my final year. She talked about some of the opportunities that were available to me as a senior, including a potential internship with a local gallery and the possibility of having my work included in a regional college tour exhibition. Miss Rodriguez also mentioned that she'd been in touch with admissions counselors at several top art schools about my portfolio, and that there was genuine excitement about my applications. I think hearing this from a professional educator helped Marcus understand that this wasn't just about me wanting to avoid family responsibilities. It was about my actual future and career prospects. The financial aid office also came through with some good news. They'd been reviewing my application for need-based assistance, and they were able to offer me a partial scholarship for senior year based on both my academic record and my artistic achievements. The scholarship covers about 40% of tuition, which significantly reduces the financial pressure on Marcus and my mom. I'm trying really hard to hold up my end of the bargain by staying better connected with everyone at home. I've started sending weekly emails to my mom with photos of what I'm working on in the studios, and I video chat with the twins every Sunday afternoon. They love seeing my projects and hearing stories about my friends, and I think it's helping them understand that I'm not rejecting them when I'm away. I'm just living a different part of my life. Marcus and I have been texting more regularly than we ever have before, which feels like a small miracle. He asks specific questions about my classes and projects, and I've been trying to share more details about my daily life, instead of just giving generic updates. We're planning a weekend visit in October, where he'll come see my studio space, meet my teachers, and maybe even sit in on one of my classes. It's strange. Going through this crisis actually made me realize how much I do want my family to be part of my life. I just want them to be part of it in a way that doesn't require me to give up everything else that matters to me. I think Marcus is starting to understand that supporting my independence actually strengthens our relationship instead of threatening it. Senior year is already shaping up to be incredible. I'm working on a multimedia installation about family, identity, and belonging for my final exhibition. The piece incorporates sculptures, digital projections, and interactive elements, and it's directly inspired by everything I've learned about chosen family versus biological family over the past few years. My friends and I are also collaborating on a group piece for the Winter Showcase, a performance art installation that combines Jake's music composition, Zoe's video work, Connor's choreography, and my sculptural elements. It's the kind of project that could only happen in a place like Whitmore, where you're surrounded by other young artists who push you to be more creative and ambitious. Update 3. 1 month later, Marcus visited Whitmore 2 weekends ago, and it was honestly one of the most important moments in our relationship. He spent 3 full days on campus, and I could see his perspective on everything shifting in real time. The first day, I gave him a complete tour of the facilities. We spent hours in the sculpture studio, and Marcus was genuinely amazed by the equipment and workspace available to students. He's handy with tools from his own carpentry hobby, so he understood immediately how advanced and professional the setup was. When he saw the 3D printers, laser cutters, and industrial kilns, he kept saying things like, "I had no idea," and "This is incredible." But what really got him was seeing me work. I was in the middle of fabricating part of my senior installation, which involves welding and precision metalwork. Marcus watched me operate equipment that he'd never even heard of, solving technical problems and making creative decisions that impressed him. At one point, he said, "I never realized how sophisticated your work had become." And I could tell he was seeing me as a real artist for the first time, not just a kid playing with art supplies. The second day, Marcus met my friends and teachers. Jake performed one of his compositions for us in the music studio. Zoe showed us her latest film project, and Connor did an improvised dance piece that left Marcus speechless. I think seeing my friends' talents helped Marcus understand the level of creativity and professionalism I'm surrounded by every day. Miss Rodriguez spent over an hour with Marcus, talking about my artistic development and my prospects for college and beyond. She showed him pieces I'd created over the years, and explained how my technical skills and conceptual thinking had evolved. She also talked about the collaborative projects I'd been involved in, and the leadership roles I'd taken on within the arts community. But the moment that really changed everything was when we were walking through the sculpture garden, and Marcus stopped in front of a piece I'd made during sophomore year. It's an abstract representation of family relationships, twisted metal forms that are separate but connected, reaching toward each other across empty space. I'd never told him about the personal inspiration behind the piece, but he stood there for a long time, just looking at it. Finally, he said, "This is about us, isn't it?" And when I nodded, he said, "I think I understand now why you need to be here. This place lets you make sense of things in ways that nowhere else could." That night, we went to dinner in town, just the two of us. Marcus apologized for how he'd handled the whole situation over the summer. He said that seeing me in my element at Whitmore made him realize that pulling me away would have been like asking a fish to live on land. He also admitted that he'd been acting out of his own insecurities about not being my biological father, and worrying that once I graduated college, I'd disappear from their lives entirely. I told Marcus that I understood his fears, but that trying to control me wasn't going to create the relationship he wanted. I also said that if he kept supporting my dreams and treating me like a capable person whose opinions mattered, I'd be much more likely to want him in my future. We ended up talking until almost midnight about everything. My memories of him and Mom getting together, his struggles with figuring out how to be a step-parent, my feelings about my biological dad leaving, the complicated reality of blended families. It was the most honest conversation we'd ever had, and I felt like we were finally understanding each other as real people, instead of just playing our assigned family roles. Marcus is now planning to bring my mom and the twins for a family visit in the spring. He's also asked if I'd be interested in doing a summer internship at his architectural firm next year, combining my artistic skills with practical design experience. The idea of collaborating with Marcus professionally feels like such a huge step forward in our relationship. The third day of his visit, Marcus sat in on one of my art theory classes and attended a critique session where students presented work for peer and faculty feedback. He was fascinated by the intellectual rigor of the discussions and the sophisticated way students analyzed each other's work. Afterward, he told me that he hadn't realized how much academic learning was happening alongside the artistic creation. When it was time for Marcus to leave, he hugged me goodbye, which he'd never done before, and said he was proud of who I was becoming. He also said he was sorry it had taken him so long to really understand what Whitmore meant to me and why I needed to finish my education there. Since his visit, our whole family dynamic has shifted. Marcus has been sharing stories and photos from his trip with my mom and the twins, helping them understand what my life at school is really like. The twins are now excited about visiting in the spring, and they've been asking me to video chat more often so they can see my studio and meet my friends over FaceTime. My mom has been so relieved by the change in Marcus's attitude. She told me that she'd been feeling guilty for months about the tension between me and Marcus, but that she hadn't known how to fix it. Seeing us connect during his visit has made her feel like we're finally becoming a real family instead of just people who live in the same house sometimes. Update 4. 2 months later. I'm now halfway through my senior year, and everything continues to be amazing. My installation piece about family and belonging is coming together beautifully, and several college admissions counselors have already seen preliminary photos and expressed serious interest in my portfolio. Marcus and I have maintained our new communication pattern, texting regularly and having longer phone conversations every couple of weeks. He asks detailed questions about my projects and classes, and I've been sharing more about my daily life and friendships. It feels like we're building an actual relationship instead of just going through the motions of being family. The family is planning their spring visit for late April, which will coincide with my senior exhibition opening. I'm so excited for them to see my final project and meet all the people who have been important to me over the years. The twins are already planning what they want to see and do on campus, and my mom has been asking questions about bringing her camera to document everything. Most importantly, I'm not having to choose between my dreams and my family anymore. It took almost losing everything to get here, but I feel like we've all learned something important about communication, compromise, and what it really means to support someone you love. I know not every kid in my situation gets this kind of resolution, and I'm incredibly grateful for how things worked out. Marcus's willingness to actually visit my world and see what mattered to me, instead of just judging it from a distance, made all the difference. Senior year has been everything I hoped it would be. My collaborative project with Jake, Zoe, and Connor is getting featured in the spring showcase, and we've already gotten interest from a gallery in Boston about potentially exhibiting it after graduation. My individual portfolio is stronger than I ever imagined it could be, and I've been accepted early decision to my top choice art school for next fall. But the best part is that I'm not having to leave my family behind to pursue my future. We've figured out how to stay connected across distance and different life experiences, which feels like preparation for all the changes that are coming as I transition to college and adulthood. I still think about what would have happened if Marcus hadn't been willing to listen, or if I hadn't been able to find the right way to communicate with him. It makes me appreciate how precious and fragile these family relationships are, and how much work it takes to maintain them when everyone is growing and changing. But mostly, I just feel grateful and excited about everything that's ahead. Senior year, college, my artistic career, and a family that finally feels like they're truly on my team. Final update, end of senior year. I'm writing this final update from my dorm room at Whitmore, just a few days before graduation. It's been an incredible year, and I wanted to share how everything turned out. My senior exhibition opened last month, and it was honestly one of the best nights of my life. My installation piece, which I ended up calling Chosen Constellations, was displayed in the main gallery space, and the opening reception was packed with students, faculty, families, and even some local art collectors and gallery owners. The piece itself is a large-scale multimedia installation that combines metal sculptures, digital projections, interactive sound elements, and spaces for viewers to move through and experience. It's all about the different ways we form connections and create meaning in our relationships. Biological family, chosen family, artistic community, mentorship, friendship. Visitors can walk through different sections and experience how these various types of belonging feel emotionally and physically. Marcus, my mom, and the twins came for the opening, and seeing their reaction to my work was incredibly moving. The twins were fascinated by the interactive elements and spent almost an hour exploring every detail. My mom cried when she saw the section dedicated to maternal relationships, and Marcus. Marcus stood in the center of the installation for a long time, just taking it all in. Afterward, he told me that experiencing the piece helped him understand not just my artistic vision, but also my perspective on family and belonging. He said it made him realize that my connections to my friends, teachers, and artistic community weren't threats to our family relationships. They were additional sources of strength and support that made me a richer, more complete person. The collaborative project with my friends was also a huge success. Our performance installation, Intersections, was selected for the Regional High School Arts Showcase and will be touring to 3 different colleges next fall. We've also been commissioned to create a smaller version for permanent installation at Whitmore, which feels like such an honor. Individually, my portfolio has exceeded every expectation I had. I've been accepted to 6 different art schools and universities, with significant scholarship offers from most of them. I ended up choosing the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, which has an incredible sculpture program and opportunities for interdisciplinary work that align perfectly with my interests. But beyond the artistic and academic successes, the most important outcome of this year has been the transformation in my family relationships. Marcus and I have developed a genuine connection based on mutual respect and understanding. He's become someone I actually want to share good news with, someone whose opinion I value, someone I can imagine staying close to throughout my adult life. The summer internship at his architectural firm is definitely happening, and I'm excited about the chance to learn about design from a different perspective while spending more time at home. Marcus has also offered to help me set up a studio space in our garage that I can use during college breaks, which feels like such a meaningful gesture of support for my continued artistic development. My relationship with my mom has also deepened over the year. She's been much more engaged with my artistic work and has started sharing my projects with her friends and colleagues. She's also been more assertive about advocating for my needs and perspectives within the family, which has been really encouraging to see. The twins and I have maintained our weekly video chats throughout the year, and they've become genuinely excited about art and creativity as a result of seeing my work. Sarah has started drawing more seriously, and David has been building elaborate sculptures out of Legos and found objects. I love feeling like I'm influencing them in positive ways. Even Emma and I have grown closer this year. She's been documenting the whole family transformation through photography, and she's planning to apply to art schools herself when she graduates. Having a creative ally within the family has meant so much to me. Looking back on the crisis last summer, I'm amazed by how much everyone was able to grow and change. Marcus went from threatening to derail my education to becoming one of my strongest supporters. My mom went from feeling caught in the middle to actively advocating for my dreams. I went from feeling like I had to choose between family and independence to understanding that I could have both. I think the key was that we all had to get past our fears. My fear of losing my autonomy and artistic community, Marcus's fear of losing me entirely, my mom's fear of family conflict, and focus on what we actually wanted for our relationships and our future. The communication skills we developed through this crisis have continued to serve us well. Instead of making assumptions about each other's feelings or motivations, we've learned to ask direct questions and share our perspectives honestly. Instead of seeing disagreement as a threat, we've learned to see it as an opportunity to understand each other better. I'm heading to college in the fall with such a different sense of family support than I had a year ago. Instead of feeling like I'm escaping from something, I feel like I'm being launched toward my future by people who believe in me and want me to succeed. Whitmore gave me the artistic foundation, the creative community, and the confidence I needed to pursue my dreams. But this year also taught me that family relationships can evolve and grow, even when they've been strained or misunderstood for years. I'm graduating tomorrow, and for the first time in my life, I feel like my whole family, biological, chosen, and created, is celebrating together. It's a pretty incredible feeling. Top comments. As a parent of a kid in a similar program, your stepdad's initial reaction was probably fear disguised as control. These intensive artistic programs create such strong identities and communities that parents can feel completely left out. The fact that he was willing to visit your world and really see what you'd built there shows genuine growth. I'm so glad he came around to understanding that supporting your passion is good parenting, not a threat to family unity. You, art teacher life. I teach at a residential arts program very similar to Whitmore, and I see this family dynamic play out regularly. Parents invest enormous amounts of money and emotional energy, and then panic when they realize their kid is thriving in an environment they don't understand. The families who find ways to bridge that gap, like your stepdad visiting campus and really engaging with your work, tend to have the strongest relationships in the long run. Your story gives me hope for some of my current students who are dealing with similar family pressures. Boarding school alum. I graduated from a program like yours about 8 years ago and went through something eerily similar with my parents' junior year. They threatened to pull me out because they felt disconnected and worried I was becoming too independent. The compromise we found was having them visit campus regularly and me being much more intentional about sharing my school experience with them during breaks. We're closer now than we were before the crisis, which I never would have expected. Sometimes these conflicts force everyone to communicate more honestly than they ever have before. As a step-parent myself, I really appreciate your honesty about how difficult these relationships can be to navigate. Your stepdad was probably dealing with a lot of insecurity about his role in your life, especially as you were becoming more independent and successful in an environment he couldn't really access. The fact that he was ultimately willing to be vulnerable about his fears and change his approach shows real maturity. I hope other step-parents read this and learn from his example. Your stepdad building you that garage studio years ago shows that he's always cared about your artistic development, even when he was struggling with other aspects of your relationship. The fact that he's now offering to help you create a college break studio space feels like such beautiful growth in understanding how to support you practically. Sometimes parents need to see concrete evidence of their kids' achievements before they can fully appreciate what they're supporting. You family dynamics expert. This is such a textbook example of how family crises can actually strengthen relationships when everyone is willing to do the hard work of honest communication. Your stepdad's visit to your school was crucial. He needed to see your world firsthand instead of just imagining it or hearing about it secondhand. And your willingness to be vulnerable about wanting a relationship with him while also standing firm about your needs created space for real connection to develop. To you/creative parent 47, you're so right about the fear thing. I think Marcus had built up this whole narrative in his head about me becoming this distant, ungrateful kid who was going to abandon the family as soon as I could. Actually seeing me in my element at school helped him realize that my independence was a sign of healthy development, not rejection of him. To use our teacher life. I hope your students who are dealing with similar situations get the chance to show their families what they're building at school. I think a lot of parents have misconceptions about what these residential programs are actually like. They imagine either total academic neglect or cold institutional environments. Seeing the reality of the community and the quality of education can be so eye-opening. To/step-parent struggles. The step-parent thing is so complicated because there's no clear roadmap for how those relationships are supposed to work. I think Marcus felt like he couldn't be too involved because he wasn't my real dad, but he also felt hurt when I seemed independent of him. We had to figure out what kind of relationship we actually wanted instead of just assuming it would happen naturally. To you/sculptor mom, that garage studio really was important. It showed that Marcus believed in my art, even when he was struggling with other aspects of our relationship. I think he's always wanted to support me, but he didn't always know how to do it in ways that felt meaningful to me. The college break studio idea feels like he's finally figured out how to be helpful in ways that actually matter to me. Additional comment from OP. I keep thinking about how many kids don't get the resolution I got, and it makes me want to share this story as widely as possible. Not every family is going to be willing to do the work we did, and not every kid has the advantages I had. Supportive friends, understanding teachers, financial aid options, a stepsister who was willing to advocate. But I think there are lessons here about the importance of honest communication, the value of trying to understand each other's perspectives, and the possibility that even really strained family relationships can change if everyone is willing to be vulnerable and do the hard work. I'm also grateful that this crisis happened when it did, during high school, rather than after I'd already left for college. It gave us time to practice these new ways of relating to each other before I became fully independent. I think that's going to make my transition to college much healthier for everyone. To any other kids reading this who are dealing with similar family pressure around their education or life choices, your dreams and goals matter, and it's worth advocating for them, even when it's scary or difficult. But also, try to understand where your family is coming from, even when their fears or concerns seem unreasonable. Sometimes the people who seem most opposed to your independence are just scared of losing you entirely. And to any parents reading this, supporting your kids' independence and their choices doesn't mean you're going to lose them. In our case, Marcus's willingness to really see and support my world at Whitmore actually brought us closer together than we'd ever been. Trust your kids, engage with their passions, and remember that healthy relationships can handle growth and change.